everybody. Today we are discussing scaling BD efforts for our episode today of Amplify, which is the podcast for accounting firm growth. I'm your host, Chris Camara, and this season it's business development and business development tech, how BDs are using tech to win. In this episode, we're going to talk to Brian Blaha, who is the former Chief Growth Officer at Whipley and the Managing Director of Winding River Consulting. He's also the Board Chair for the Illinois Society of CPAs. We will explore how to partner with firm leaders, build a BD team, and use data to scale. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. But before we jump into the questions, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Perfect. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me on the show. Looking forward to the discussion. So, as Chris mentioned, I was formerly at Whipley. I spent 29 years of my career at the firm. I started as an auditor, so, interesting, you see growth leaders coming from multiple different tracks. I came through the firm as a CPA track and really had to learn growth. Primarily, the first part of my career was as an auditor, and then became partner in 2007. Like, it's hard to say, right? At that point in my career, I was working solely with financial institution clients in Wisconsin, and we had about 90% market share at that point in time. So as a young partner, I was asking myself the question, it's like, well, what am I going to do if I'm just going to serve clients? I enjoyed the growth aspect of my job. And so the firm asked if I would move to Chicago. And of course, I had to come home and tell my wife, what do you think about moving to Chicago? And she was reluctant at first, but of course, we made the jump. So that 2011, I moved down to Chicago. Started an office from scratch for the firm, which was, generally unheard of, but it was something that, was definitely supported, by the leadership team at Whipley at the time, and grew a practice from scratch. And, I'm sure we'll kind of dig in, when we talk organic growth and how BD supports that, but really learn the effort, what different motions it takes to actually grow a portfolio from scratch. And then the firm did a bunch of merger and acquisitions in Chicago at that time. So I became the Chicago market leader, ultimately serving a term on Whipley's board from 2013 to 2016. And then the managing partner at the time, Rick Dreyer, asked if he's looking to expand his leadership team, and asked if I would take on the chief growth officer role, which I served for 8 years in that capacity. And in that role, I oversaw all of our go-to-market motions. Industries and geography leaders reported to me, as well as marketing, and then the sales team as well, which I know we'll dig into. I left about a year and a half ago, spent a little term in private equity, and joined Winding River about 7 months ago. And so it's been a great ride.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you were with private equity for a while. That's interesting, since that's so big in the profession right now. That's interesting. So let's talk about Whipley, though. You built a BD team from 0 to 50, right? So tell us about that. How did you partner with the firm leaders and make that happen?
Yeah, so it started out, we did so much on the merger and acquisition front. So we had brought in a couple of firms that were on the advisory side that had a couple of business developers. So we acquired the first part of the team, if you will. So, and in that, if you think about advisory practices, those go-to-market motions are a little bit different than the traditional firm. For example, I think it was 2017, we brought in a firm that focused exclusively on Sage Intacct implementations, and they had a small Microsoft practice at the time. So how they went to market, or they sold through their business development team. So I think they had a team of 3 or 4 people. So that really started the BD team. I think we had a couple other business developers, floating around the firm, just that different practice units had tried to hire, but no one had brought it together under one singular team. So the first part of that is making sure that we had aligned go-to-market strategy, I would say, and the firm was early in transition from a service offering go-to-market strategy to an industry go-to-market strategy.
Okay.
Which, so you think about an individual business developer selling one product versus trying to sell your full suite of services. And so that pivot was pretty challenging to make because they really had to understand or learn the other products and service offerings that we did. And selling tech is frankly different than selling services, traditional CPA services. So with that, we also had to align our comp plan. We went through a couple of different versions of the comp plan, but making sure that it was optimized for our go-to-market strategy. We developed a metric, which kind of gets to your question about the leadership team, is you got to be able to prove that they're being effective.
Right.
So we developed a couple of different metrics, but the one that I focused in on is dollars won divided by the compensation. So essentially you got a multiple of comp. I remember working with a couple of other growth leaders at the time just to make sure that we were, because they were all struggling with the same thing, that how do you substantiate, having a business development team inside the firm? And we pretty much would be somewhere between 8 to 10 times comp would be the metric. I mean, it started out lower, right? But as the team matured, the people that were really doing well were upwards into that, plus 10, dollars won for comp. Anytime you brought in a new BD, it actually dropped as you can imagine, because there's a ramp up time. Sure. When you're bringing on a new business developer. But that's really what we did look to do is optimize, and then as we could prove that we were being successful, then we would add a couple more, and then just start layering them on. So we kept the metric not too far out of system. The other thing I'd say that we had to work through is aligning them with the partner group.
Sure.
And there's differences of opinion in the firm, and it gets into be whether you want your business developers to be hunters or gatherers. If the old adage, right? But hunting is different than supporting a sale. But as we know, not all partners are created equal when it comes to being able to support a sale, especially in a complex sales cycle. So having a business developer aligned to those type of sales, can be really beneficial. So, it's again, so not all the team was all hunters, not all the team was all gatherers, and then over time, as our digital strategy, leads coming through the website really started to take off. We started to add, the traditional sales development rep, SDR, into the mix as well. So we ended up with, out of that 55 people that were just solely lead developers based on, warm leads coming through the website.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot. So let's talk about CRM. Everybody has their CRM stories, right? So how did you embed CRM into your culture? That's always a challenge. And talk to me about your partnership with marketing too.
Yeah. So we were a pretty early adopter of CRM going back to the early 2000s. It was a pretty rudimentary system, but and then somewhere in the mid 2000s, we transitioned to Dynamics as our platform. And I would say the early days it was primarily a compliance tool. So it was, hey, get your sales in so that we can track you when it comes to partner comp time. And that was okay. But until we actually said, hey, you're not getting a raise unless you have your information in CRM, did we actually start getting adherence to it. But again, it's still a compliance tool at that point. Of course, your business developers are used to doing it, so they were always the best because they wouldn't get paid their commissions if it wasn't in there. So it's amazing that it actually works that way if you have a little bit of a hammer. But over time, what we saw then is we could start giving real business insights into once we were confident that the data was in. And at first it was data got in at the end of the fiscal year. Then they started, end of the quarter. Then it became, okay, it's just now something that we do because no one wants to go through and plug in information after the fact. So I probably got to feel 85% comfortable, that 80 to 95% comfortable that the data was actually pretty accurate. And then you could start seeing trends in leads, trends in your sales pipeline. During COVID, as an example, we saw that our lead volume, started to go down. If you can imagine, everybody was hunkered down.
Sure.
And the leadership team was, we got to get our people working. And I was seeing the data. I'm like, no, we have to get our people selling, because if we don't, then we're not going to have any work to do, come, 6-7 months from now. So we saw that trend. And then, the last 2 years I was there, the economic cycle was such that we started to see the deal pipeline lengthen out.
Okay.
So lead volume was really good, but the pipeline was not closing as fast. And so we made some pivots to do like a deal desk where we were trying to get in front of deals that were slowing down, as an example. So you could start to bring those type of insights to the partners and to the BD team when you have good data kind of along the way. And frankly, that starts to be able to be like, oh, now CRM is an actual tool. And then the other thing I'll just mention lastly on this question is I developed what I called the growth dashboard that essentially brought all of our data together. And it had multiple different tabs on it that people could look at. Okay, what does our lead volume look like? What does our pipeline, true deals looking like? Who's on the deal? How are we giving credit for it? So everybody could look at everybody else's data, see clients. And then we had a client page as well that we would look at client segmentation and the like. So that dashboard was used. I mean, I was in it every day as the senior leader, but, I know all of our leaders, industry leaders would be in it, if not daily, weekly. And then even the partners obviously got used to using it on a very regular basis.
So tell me about your relationship and partnership with marketing.
Yeah. So marketing reported to me as well. So I was very much, I had marketing and sales, which I'm a big proponent of for what I would call a practice growth office. That it's because growth is marketing and sales, and obviously your partner selling for. So it's kind of all of the above when you get into growth. So I started doing joint meetings with marketing and sales, and we actually had at pods. So like for our manufacturing team, we had a marketing lead, maybe a junior lead, junior marketer on that team, plus our sales leader for manufacturing, plus the industry leader. And they all worked collectively on their go-to-market strategy. Because I was a big believer that sales and marketing, especially in today's environment where the buyer is using marketing channels much greater, and they're not actually contacting your sales force till way later in the process.
Yeah.
So they were fairly seamless. I mean, it took a while to get there because the traditional handoff model was alive and well.
Interesting. So this season, we're focusing on tech tools. So what kind of tech tools did you use, and how did you use the data to inform your conversations with clients and prospects?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the CRM was the base of the tech stack, but we did have Sales Navigator. So, I would say, the sales team were big users of Sales Navigator. Then I would say we also made sure that our accelerator partners, so our, the Rainmakers, had access to Sales Navigator as well, because they would act more like a sales, a true BD than not. But those licenses can be expensive, so we didn't necessarily push that all the way down into the partner group, and they wouldn't have used it anyway. But so Sales Navigator. Then you had Bombora, which is a buyer intent tool. So buyer intent, basically, it would tell us when, based on domain name, what sort of surges were going on relating to the searches within the client base. So I'll just give a little anecdote story on that. When we first started using it, we had a CRM practice, a tech practice, right? So we had a client that was surging on Salesforce, and we could tell in the data that it was a very hot lead. So we handed that over to a business developer and said, hey, and inform the relationship executive on the account, hey, we're going to reach out to the client. They're surging on this. And this is always gets a little big brotherish, right? Because you got some knowledge here. So it's like, hey, reach out to the client. Hey, how's it going? And hey, what are you guys doing on your tech, sales tech stack these days? Oh, well, I can't believe you called because we're looking at Salesforce. And of course it led to a really nice deal. Now, the flip side of that is we had a partner that got some intent data that called and said, hey, our intent data showed you were, looking at this, not the right use of the data. Because they obviously were like, well, that's kind of creepy. So you got to use the data, but also have some emotional IQ around, how you actually go about that. So those three platforms, at Wipfli, we did not invest in Intro Hive as an example. I'm a big believer like in an Intro Hive or a Propense. We just weren't ready for those tools, primarily because we were going to redo our instance of Dynamics, and I didn't want to bring in a tool that, on top of the change management required to use a tool like that. But those type of tools were next on my roadmap before I left, as an example. And then I mentioned the growth dashboard as well. I think it's really important to have good solid data in front of people where they're not having to dig through the CRM to try to find it. And Power BI can surface that data real time in one place. And so having access to the types of services that a client has today, what gaps do they have in their in the offering that we could potentially talk to them about, and those type of things, I think is pretty critical as well. The sales team had some additional tools like sequencing tools and outreach tools, which I didn't necessarily get hands on with them, but they definitely were utilizing tools like that as well.
Okay, interesting. So I understand you built a relationship maturity model at Wipfli. So tell me what that is. Tell us more.
Yeah, so that dates back to when I was growing Chicago. And, this ties into identifying your ideal client profile as well as understanding your target market. When you're trying to grow a market organically, starting out and knowing, okay, well, what's the population who I'm trying to go after is really the starting point. So at that time, when I moved down, I identified 165 potential clients that I was going at. And one would say, well, that doesn't seem like a lot. But on the other hand, if you're averaging somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a client, that's a pretty sizable, target market that you're going after, right?
Sure.
But I realized true growth, it's not like you just meet somebody and they buy from you. So I needed some sort of a system to be able to say, well, how are we advancing the relationship, inside of those new relationships that you were building. So I developed a scale of 0 to 5 for that. You basically, 0 would be we had no relationship with the client or the prospect. 1 would be maybe I knew an attorney that worked with them, so there was some influencer that you had, all the way up to a 4, which was their client and they don't know it yet.
Okay.
And I would define that by they're calling me with questions. Anytime I reach out, they're like, yeah, I'll meet with you. I'll go to lunch with you. And of course that led to strategic type conversations. And soon thereafter, once you got to that level, it would be, okay, they're moving to a client relationship, which then, was a 5. I also had it on the client side because, again, clients don't go from, they start out as a transactional client most of the time. They move into a partnership type client to a trusted business advisor type relationship. And so we also did the same type of scale on the client side, where the lowest rating would be maybe, the CIO or the CFO hired you for something, outside of, and ultimately you wanted to be in the CEO's ear, and that, if you got the whole executive team kind of, that would be a 5 type or an A type relationship right on that side.
Okay. So tell me, what advice would you give to firms who want to scale their outreach, but they don't want to lose their authenticity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I saw this, it was the digital, like in the digital world, which is obviously where we're moving. It has to be digital plus human.
Okay.
And I think that equation is really interesting. I mean, even if you're building a relationship online, and we all do it in our consumer world, right? I mean, we through whether it's through an Amazon or different platforms that we use, we start to build a relationship with a brand. But then most often there's a human component that ends up coming in, especially in the B2B world. Because at the end of the day, it's humans serving humans in most regard, right? And so I do believe that you have to have a really great digital experience and then a really great human experience in order for this to work in the current environment. I also think clients value clients value has evolved, I would say, and they expect that there's value in the equation, and industry expertise, I think, definitely lends itself to that. It's no longer can you just be a generalist because you have to know their industry. And I know firms are making that transition, but I think struggling with that a little bit because there's a certain element of scale that has to happen as well when you get into go to market by industry. And then at the end of the day, the tried and true organic growth strategies still work.
Okay.
Show up where your prospects are, and that's why industry expertise helps too, because if you're shotgunning it, thinking you're going to go to the country club or the chamber event, that's going to be a really challenging process. But if you are going to an industry specialized event where your type of client prospects are hanging out, obviously a whole different motion that goes on there. So, and then you can target that client base digitally and through human aspects in order to make that work. So in that regard, I think you can be authentic and show up, but you're doing so in a more targeted way.
Right. You have the data behind you. Right. So tell me, you've had a long career, and tell me about, how business development efforts, what's your view on how it's changed over the years?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was thinking about it, in some ways, it hasn't changed.
Okay.
That like what I was just saying on the organic side, I think obviously more firms are more specialized today. So more firms are taking advantage of those, more targeted growth efforts. Definitely digital marketing channels has changed and client buying habits have changed. We know that the buyer on the other side is more of a collaborative buyer today. So I've heard upwards of 6, 7 to even more people in the buying decision. For example, I'm in a complex sale right now that I've been working the account for upwards of almost a year.
Okay.
Finally getting in front of their leadership team, which is 5 people, and again, to their executive, board, which is another 9 or 8 people. So you think about it, there's a lot of hoops to go through.
Sure.
And so understanding your buyer and understanding who's making the decision is really critical, more so today probably than in the past. Before, I think you could be like, oh, I'm selling to the CFO. They're the ones making that decision. Well, not so much. They want to have confidence in the buying process, right? So what are you doing to ensure that you're adding confidence in that? So things like, can they validate you online? LinkedIn is essentially your billboard, your personal billboard online. So is that updated? Is it fully built out? I mean, I can't tell you how many people I pull up their LinkedIn and they have the gray banner. That's the standard when you sign up, Chris.
Whoops.
Right? Or they don't have their about me filled out and, don't have their experience really, that people can really get their credibility. So I think that's really important, as well as, thought leadership. I mean, are they able to validate your expertise by the thought leadership that you're putting out? So I'd say that those are probably the the biggest critical things.
Yeah, that's interesting. So AI is the big topic, right? So what's your take on the future of AI in professional services selling? And real value will it add? Just noise? What do you think?
Yeah, so I do believe AI is going to have an impact. I go back to that digital plus human aspect. I think human in the loop is still going to be a critical item. But if you think about value, there's my friend Michelle Golden you introduced me to a smile curve, and she'll probably laugh because I fought her on it when we implemented their pricing model. But I'm going to apply the smile curve in a little bit different context than Michelle would bring to it, or it's similar, but in the case of AI. If you think about AI, a lot of times, the smile curve is, at the end of the smile is where value sits in a process.
Okay.
And it's at the start and at the end is primarily where you get value. So in the planning stage and in the delivery of whatever service that we have. In the middle, there's a lot of things that we do that obviously contribute to the overall value, but they're not individually, they're not as valuable. And AI is going to, definitely be infused into that bottom end of the curve. So, humans bring value at the bookends, AI infused in the bottom. And what I would say to that then is in the selling process, which is, you think about this, in that selling process, a lot of the things that we do in the selling process, things like putting together proposals, putting together the statement of work, client or prospect research, all those things that, are just baseline to what we need in the sales process can be infused with AI. So taking time, out of the sales process, allowing probably for us to have more sales motions in play, right? Because if we can have AI take some of that, we're not as capital intensive when it comes to some of the motions.
Uh-huh.
But where true value sits is still going to be, building relationships, closing deals, having, the emotional intelligence to be able to read a buyer, understand, the buyers, the ultimate buyers and all of that is still going to be, in the hands of the human seller.
Okay. That's been a theme throughout your talk today, that you can't leave the humans out of the loop by any means. So thank you, Brian, so much. I really appreciate you joining us today and giving us your insights. So tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm a big user of LinkedIn, so please find me on LinkedIn. Of course, the Winding River website is another spot, and you can, book a meeting that way as well. So, but we're really accessible, and of course, I'm always willing to chat with your listeners on any topic that's burning in their growth area.
All right. That's great. Thank you. So that's it for another episode of Amplify, the podcast for accounting firm growth. Big thanks to all of you for listening today. And again, to Brian for the engaging conversation. If you like what you heard, we'd love a review on the podcast platform you're listening to us on now. And be sure to listen to the other episodes this season on our theme, business development and business development tech. You can learn more about Amplify in our past seasons on accountingmarketing.org. Look for the podcast under publications. And if you want to connect with me, reach out on LinkedIn. It might not be as updated as Brian wants it to be, but I am there. So thank you again. And we look forward to having you join us for another episode too soon.